From the dawn of time we came, moving silently down through the centuries, living many secret lives, struggling to reach the time of the gathering, when the few who remain will battle to the last. No one has ever known we were among you, until now.
It's the Highlander.
It's a movie.
Any good?
Very good. It won the Academy Award
Oh, for what?
for best movie ever made.
Happy Halloween, ladies!
Nuns, no sense of humor.
There can be only one.
And welcome to another episode of the Containment Unit. I'm Tony.
I am Juan Sanchez Villalobos Ramier, Chief Metallurgist to King Charles V of Spain.
Lindsey is out of town right now. She's got the girls visiting her parents, my in-laws. So back with me again, best friend of 20 years, Jack Flynn. Jack, how's it going?
It is going well. Hello, everyone.
So we kind of talked about this at the end of the Westerns episode that, well, you and I together, we can just ramble on about so many different things, but we had to talk about it. There can be only one topic.
And it must be Highlander.
So we are talking not just about a movie, we're talking about the whole Highlander franchise. And we're going to get this in under an hour 15. That's what we're aiming for tonight.
Oh,
so
that's a tough chore there.
well, I think with some of the movies we're going to be able to go, yeah, and this movie existed. Next.
That is so true.
This is kind of a sentimental spot for me. This was one of the first things that we found out we both liked when we first met at Backdoor Theater, summer of 1998.
Oh, Jesus.
Damn, we're old. So, at that time, I had seen most of the series, and I had actually only recently been familiar with the first movie. What was your experience with Highlander at that point?
So, same thing. The series was on USA Network. I think that's probably where you watched it as well. Mm-hmm. It was on the USA Network. I remember catching it. Any new episodes, though, because it was in syndication, if you wanted to catch a new episode, there was, God, I can't remember what it was. It was like Channel 8, Channel 9, it was back in the day, and it was at midnight. So any brand new episodes of Highlander would be showing at like freaking midnight on a random channel. I think it might have been the old UPN channel, but then at a certain time at night it changed into a different channel. Cable television, kids will never understand it. But I watched the TV series, and how I got away with watching the movie is because my parents thought, well, if it's a TV show, it's okay if he watches the movie, even though what they didn't realize is the movie was rated R and had tons of gore and sex scenes in it. But they just didn't think about it and didn't bother looking at it, which was fine with me. So I wound up as a kid I think I owned all three movies as a kid. And Highlander 3 is notorious for its multiple hardcore almost sex scenes.
Oh, yeah. No, that's the movie where a prostitute throws a condom to Mario Van Peebles and says, no glove, no love.
No love.
And he eats it.
So, yeah, that was my introduction. Obviously, Highlander was huge in the 90s. Oddly enough, they had the Highlander catalog that they would send out, and you could buy product from it. I still have, to this day, in almost mint condition, the coat from the Highlander catalog of Duncan MacLeod. And I have the belt buckle that Duncan MacLeod wore, and I even have a pin of Connor MacLeod's sword handle, and then I have a letter opener of Duncan MacLeod's sword, I believe. So those are my relics of this odd era about Highlander.
Now, the only thing that I have Highlander related, I literally just got a few months ago. And it's a replica of Connor's katana.
Now that's cool.
Open mouth dragon katana, which I've always preferred Connor's version of the katana over Duncan's. This is not movie accurate though. The movie had like a complete white handle with no accents on it, no paint or anything, and this is painted up a little bit for shadowing and stuff like that. I don't care. Still looks amazing. My wife got me a katana mount, so it's like over the window in our bedroom. And she's like, "Why'd you pick that spot?" Well, it fits. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, I dare that motherfucker to come in this room and try something. Because it's on my side of the bed.
On a quick note of that, I read an article of a martial arts expert, and he was reviewing the Highlander sword, and he had a Duncan MacLeod version, but it was an actual, like, it was made by a sword maker, and the handle was cast from supposedly the original cast, but of course instead of being ivory like it's supposed to be in the TV show, it was, it's a nice hard polyurethane plastic or something. And the guy, as a martial arts expert, said that he gives props to Adrian Paul and Christopher Lambert, because he felt Christopher Lambert probably had the same issue, is because of all the etchings and the different things that are in this handle, to handle it as a martial arts expert in any type of sword fighting, he said it cut the living hell out of his hand, because there was all those little different edges and grooves that just kept digging in whenever he tried to perform moves. So I find that interesting. I've never heard Adrian Paul complain about that, but maybe they had a certain hero prop that they sanded down for him during fight scenes. I mean,
wouldn't be surprised. And if you look back at the original Highlander film, which we'll start talking about here in a minute, I can't think of a single fight scene that anybody, whether it be Christopher Lambert or Sean Connery, handling that sword, wasn't wearing gloves.
Well, yeah, definitely in the original movie. I think Lambert always wore gloves. In fact, even in the second, I don't remember the second, but I know the third, I think he was also wearing gloves. That was his big thing, wearing his gloves.
He didn't wear gloves in the second film early on, like when he first de-ages, and that kind of screwed him in a way, because that's the fight scene where there was an accident and he got cut on his hand down to the bone.
Oh,
so we're jumping ahead to Highlander 2,
right.
the crap fest, which not fair. I mean, let's be honest. When it comes to the grand scheme of Highlander movies, the first is the best.
Oh, yes. And when it comes to a series, it blows my mind, because somehow, as many missteps as this series has taken, which is a lot, I'm sure we can all agree here, it still thrives. And it blows my mind.
Well, this is a series where fans will, and I'm definitely one of them, will give credit to and excuse bad additions to the franchise. Highlander 2, The Quickening, is a piece of crap. Highlander 2, The Renegade Cut, I love that movie. That is a lot of fun. And I will say definitely check that out. Do not consider it part of the overall arcing story. Do not consider it a sequel to the original. Just consider it a different story with the same characters. That's all I can really say to it.
I mean, obviously we're going to get into this, but how I see Highlander 2 is, I honestly felt Highlander 2 was a good sci-fi movie. I felt it wasn't a good Highlander movie, especially not as a follow-up to the original. It was, per usual when it comes to Highlander, just a very odd choice all around.
So, it was a good sci-fi movie, but not a good follow-up to the franchise it's part of. This sounds oddly familiar with a more modern film with Captain Kirk and Spock, and basically what I'm trying to say is fuck J.J. Abrams.
That's a whole nother podcast.
Oh, and we will definitely talk about that at a later date. But
so before we go,
okay,
Duncan or Connor, which do you like best, and what's the reasoning behind it?
Well, that is something that between the two of us we already know, because we had some nicknames in high school and in the last 20 years. You're Duncan, I'm Connor. Up until a year ago, I was a Connor guy. Just something about the character, like, I felt more empathy to the character. I felt bad for the character. I never really felt bad for Duncan in anything he went through. Even with the loss of Tess, I never felt bad for him because, like, the next episode, he's boning another immortal.
That was catharsis.
Yeah, but this is a guy that he very much was... Duncan was the James Bond of Highlander.
Almost literally. He looked like Sean Connery.
I want to live in that alternate universe where Adrian Paul was the successor to Pierce Brosnan. There was talk that he was in discussions to take over the role of Bond. He would have been great. Freaking amazing. But as Duncan, if there was ever a major female guest star, you could just look at her and go, oh yeah, they're doing it. So,
there was no doubt.
There was no doubt. I never felt bad for him. But with Connor, he had the whole thing of loved and lost. He lost Heather. He lost his family. He was excommunicated from the MacLeod clan because they thought he was possessed by the devil. So I always felt more empathy towards him, and that's why I was a Connor guy. Over the past year, my wife and I, Lindsey, we've been marathoning the Highlander series. We had to stop because we got close to the point where Richie gets killed, and she refuses to watch that.
So, question, are you watching it on Hulu? Or
Amazon Prime has them all.
Okay, good, because for some reason they took it off Hulu. So now I'm resorted to YouTube. So
yeah, Amazon Prime has all of the series, including, and I had no idea they made this, a personally shot short film between the actors that played Amanda, Mythos, and Joe. And it was like,
yeah, they fit
like at one of their apartments.
Yeah, they filmed that in one of their personal apartments, and I think I've caught bits and pieces, but yeah.
Yeah, I watched a little bit of it and just went, next. So, you're definitely, if, you know, I think it's safe to say you're a Duncan guy. Why are you a Duncan guy?
Well, I mean, okay, so I'm older now, and I love Duncan. I love Duncan because he had his principles. He stuck to them. He purposely knew he was part of the games. He went out to learn whatever he could from anyone. He would take anything from anyone as long as it would help him be better. But that being said, the more I think about Connor's character, especially as an older and wiser, at least I hope I'm wiser, I kind of like Connor because he's indifferent. He's not a hero. Duncan is a hero. I mean, we can all say Duncan is a hero. If he sees someone being beaten up on the street, he'll probably go over and be like, hey, don't do that. I'll beat you up. Whereas Connor would look over and say, I don't want to get involved.
Yeah.
And I don't know, for some reason, I think maybe it's maybe Connor was older, but I don't know. For some reason, I kind of like Connor's indifference to the game. He doesn't want to be part of the game. He has to be part of it, so he just begrudgingly accepts it. Whereas Duncan, he doesn't try to be part of the game, but I think part of him actually enjoys it. And the TV series plays with it, and we'll talk about that. But I don't know. I mean, yeah, I love Duncan. I love Adrian Paul. I think Adrian Paul, physically, he's much better. I mean, he's much more believable as a 400-year-old immortal who's been fighting for his life, and Christopher Lambert is not.
Yeah, and Christopher Lambert, when he got the role for Highlander in, let me double check. I want to say, 1986. I think before that he was known for Tarzan.
Yes, Lord Greystoke,
Yeah.
Isn't that what they called it?
Like Greystone or Greystoke.
Yeah.
Definitely not a big name at the time. Then you've got Sean Connery, which this is some of the funniest shit when you think about Highlander, is that the main three guys are Christopher Lambert, Sean Connery, and Clancy Brown, who, to this day, I cannot wait for Clancy Brown to appear at a convention in Phoenix, because I want that man's autograph.
Well, yeah, he's amazing. You saw him in the Goldbergs episode, right?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, he does so much. He was actually a high point in a very... I enjoyed it, but I understand why it was a disappointing movie. The reboot of A Nightmare on Elm Street. He was the principal of the school and one of the parents that killed Freddy Krueger. He was really good in that. He's the voice of Lex Luthor. He's done the voice of Lex Luthor in all of the Superman animated stuff.
Oh, he does have a great voice.
Yeah, and not Super Troopers, Starship Troopers. He plays a major role in that, so he's a great actor. But we've got Christopher Lambert, a Frenchman playing a Scotsman who doesn't do the accent.
Who also couldn't speak English. I think he had to learn his lines phonetically.
He actually learned English very early beforehand. So he was still working out parts of it. But then you got Sean Connery, the world's most famous Scot, playing...
Who couldn't give a shit.
Yeah, he didn't care two shits whatsoever. Yeah, I'm not Spanish, I'm Egyptian. Well, you sound like a Scotsman. And then you've got Clancy Brown, who, as the Kurgan, is supposed to be Russian, but he's just Clancy Brown. So nobody's trying to do the accent of where they're from.
And again, it's odd. Per usual for Highlander, they made these very odd choices for every single lead character. But what's weird is it worked.
It did. It was like lightning in a bottle. It shouldn't work. But they made this amazing, borderline ridiculous film.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's very ridiculous. Now, one thing... between the two of us, I'm way more of a wrestling fan. One thing that bugs me about this movie is that the opening is in Madison Square Garden, New York City, the home of WWF in the 90s, or I'm sorry, the 80s. But the match that Connor's watching is the Fabulous Freebirds versus Greg Gagne and the Tonga Kid from the AWA in Minnesota. How the hell, in the day and age where Vince McMahon has a deal with Madison Square Garden, are they going to have... But then again, nobody knows two shits about that, and that's just my own fanaticism there. But...
Well, And maybe it was because it was I mean, I don't know specifics. Maybe it was spur of the moment, because originally they were supposed to be doing, I believe, a hockey game.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I think it was the hockey NHL didn't want to be related to a film where people were getting their heads lopped off, and they said, no, we're not going to do that. So they said, well, what else? Because they were trying to, have Connor have essentially PTSD flashbacks. And so maybe, I don't know, maybe the producer said, well, what else could give someone those type of flashbacks? And they said, oh, wrestling. Who's the first people that'll accept a paycheck?
Pretty much. The NHL shying away from violence.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
Now, the other question also is Connor McLeod, at this point, what was he, almost 500 years old, going to a second-rate wrestling match?
No, let's give him credit. This was the AWA in the 80s. This was third rate at best.
Oh, God, that's even worse. Why would Connor McLeod, who seemed like he hated it in the first place, he was obviously not enjoying being there, why in hell was he there?
He was bored with life. That's what I always took it as.
The only thing I can think of is what follows, obviously, is he meets someone in a parking lot. What were they supposed to meet? And maybe that's why Connor was there?
Well, we know it's the time of the gathering. And as Ramirez put it, when there's a few that remain, they'll feel an irresistible pull to a faraway land.
Right.
Pretty damn lucky for Connor, who's been living in New York for 200 years, that the gathering is in New York.
Whereas Duncan is on the West Coast, who apparently doesn't care.
Yeah, doesn't care whatsoever. You know what? It's the gathering. I'm going to move to Paris.
Every now and then.
But, so this original film, it very much has a New York feel to it.
Very much. It's the New York of the 80s that we all grew up on, that you see in, Trading Places, that you see in every 80s, even the original Ninja Turtles, which was, 91, I think?
I think it was 90.
Yeah. It's that very dirty, that very gritty New York that even in my mind I still have, because I grew up with that image. New York's not that anymore from what I hear, but it is very, like, the New York that Highlander 1 is in is very much gritty, dirty. There, you envision bums everywhere, trash everywhere. Just, it is a dark and gritty place.
It very much is. And this is something that we kind of brought up when we were talking about Westerns, and we talked about Young Guns kind of making history hot. Highlander is guilty of this, because when we see Connor as a Klansman of the Clan MacLeod, they're going off to battle, we're introduced to cousins that he has. But more importantly, we're introduced to his girlfriend.
That pig-nosed person.
No, I'm not trying to be rude to the actress, but, this is the 1500s in Scotland. There's some dirty people. There's mud. Oh, yes. There's pig shit everywhere. I mean, there's not cleanliness on the scale of attractability here. But then, this is the same woman that the moment he's not dead, she's ready to lynch him for being possessed by the devil. And then he upgrades to Heather. Yes. How in the bloody hell did he find a woman like Heather in 1500 Scotland?
He had to leave his hometown, which was very unheard of.
Yeah, he left strapped to a big piece of wood, but still, they definitely, it's a Beatty Edney played Heather. She was stunning.
Yes.
Even more so than Roxanne Hart, who plays his love interest in modern New York. And she was beautiful in her own right. But, oh my God, where did he find this woman in 1500 Scotland with all of her teeth?
I mean, well, yeah, with all of her teeth. And Connor knew he was lucky. It's why they decided to live out in the middle of nowhere. He said, well, let's make sure she'll never leave me.
And so this is where we're introduced to James Bond, Sean Connery.
Juan Villalobos Ramirez.
Really just an Egyptian who's living in Spain. He's been alive for 2,000 years, give or take at this point. Did he phone it in? Do you think he really cared about his performance? Because I don't know.
With Sean Connery, it's hard to tell because, honestly, I feel Sean Connery... I think Sean Connery always phones it in. I say that glibly, but I feel that Sean Connery chooses his projects arbitrarily. I think he's never had a real clue of his projects. I mean, he did, what was that, Zardon?
Oh, God.
Yeah.
That image is a card in Cards Against Humanity.
Yes, right? But this is the guy that he refused to play Gandalf because he said he didn't understand the script, and then he decided to play Alan Quatermain in League of Extraordinary Gentlemen because he said, well, I didn't understand it. But since the last movie I refused became big, I'll just do this one. And it was so bad, he got into he's in his 60s. No, he was in his 70s at this point. He got into a fist fight with the director and then quit acting forever. So it makes me think that Sean Connery chooses his projects arbitrarily, not if they're good, just because if either they pay money or if they take him somewhere fun.
Well, he got to go to the Highlands of Scotland.
He did, and he seemed like he was having fun.
Yeah, he definitely does a good job as Ramirez.
Oh, and I feel like he had good chemistry with Christopher Lambert.
He definitely did. They apparently got along so well that their relationship is the reason he agreed to the sequel.
Oh, that's right. Yep, you're right. In fact, wasn't it Lambert who said he wouldn't do the sequel without Connery?
Yeah, and it doesn't, and we'll get to that here in a few minutes, but it makes no sense how Ramirez shows up in the sequel. But it's Sean Connery back when he was still Sean Connery. We don't give a shit.
No,
he's the Spanish peacock. That's all we care about. And to this day, I don't think people understand why he called him a Spanish peacock.
No, they probably don't. He did have peacock feathers, I think, in his hat, didn't he?
Yeah, that it's very simple, but a lot of people miss that. When he first shows up, and let's be very blunt about it, Ramirez is a cock blocker. He shows up right after Connor and Heather. Maybe they just finished. Maybe they were going for round 2.
You should do that to me forever if you like.
Ay, las, I will. He shows up and he's got peacock feathers all in his get-up. And it's the get-up that he's wearing for the rest of the movie. So he calls him the Spanish peacock.
And it's great. The costumes for such a show that is a very cult classic. It's considered possibly an indie movie. I guess nowadays, if it was made, it would be considered an indie movie. I don't know if that technically existed back then. They had great costumes. They had great sets for such a film that seems very ad hoc. It seems like a guerrilla film almost. The way it was filmed, the way it was written, the way it was everything seems. I think in our day and age, we would go, wow, well, I could take my cell phone out and probably film something just like that.
Yeah.
But the costumes are amazing. I mean, he really does look like he's directly from the Spanish court. And Connor looks, as you said, he looks dirty. He looks directly as if he is a Scottish Highlander. And it's great. I mean, the film feels real. And I think that's one of the things that allows it to continue for people like us to love it, is it feels real. Whereas if they did this nowadays, it probably wouldn't. They would have a CGI background to make you think it was Scotland, and they would have, the clothes would look brand new, or, I mean, that's it. Everything in this movie, even though it's a quirky movie, New York, Scotland, everything, it feels real. And I think that really sells it.
And I think that has to do with the story itself, is that they give us something to latch on to. And there's one scene that always gets to me, and it's back in Scotland when Ramirez is trying to convince Connor to leave Heather. And it's where he shows him the sword and says that basically at this point we find out Ramirez has been alive for 2,000 years. In that time, he's had 3 wives. And his most recent wife is like 1,000 years, more than 1,000 years ago. That the whole point of the scene is to show off the sword. But when you really listen to it, Ramirez is so heartbroken over the death of his 3rd wife. He's been by himself for thousands of years. And it's such a beautiful story when you think about it. And that's something that we don't get in modern action films and modern sci-fi films.
It's true. I mean, Highlander, imagine if Highlander had been done today and been done right, then that's always going to be a question mark. Imagine, we would have probably gotten a spin-off of Ramirez, and it might have been gorgeous. It might have been an amazing film.
Oh, God, I kind of want to see that movie right now.
I know, right? I'm really thinking about it now.
If we had it in modern times, it would be a spin-off starring Michael Fassbender from the X-Men films.
I mean, I can see that. Yeah, I'm fine with that.
So, ultimately, Highlander gives us the Kurgan, who I think arguably is the best villain in the Highlander franchise. Evil wants the prize. That's his whole drive. But you don't dislike him necessarily. You know he's a bad guy, but he's also funny. Like that scene in the church.
Oh, the church. The infamous scene in the church. That's the best part about the Kurgan, right? He is evil, but you don't get the sense that he is like, I want to take over the world evil. He's just, this is the world, and thus it's made me this way kind of evil, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
He doesn't have a plan. He realizes in his mind the world is shit. He's been dealt a card to cut off people's heads, and he's like, okay, let's just do this. I'm going to cut off people's heads. I'm going to enjoy life. I'm going to do whatever I can, and it's funny in his mind, and he makes it obvious throughout multiple scenes. He finds it funny, and obviously his size and everything comes into play because he intimidates tons of people throughout the show, but he enjoys it, and that makes him a very enjoyable character. Again, the church scene, as you said.
And apparently I just recently found out that in filming that church scene, Clancy Brown, after they called cut, went up to the real nuns and priests and apologized if he had offended them. Because this is the guy who like sticks his tongue out at the nuns and "Happy Halloween, ladies,"
Well,
and then licks a priest's hand.
and that scene, a lot of that scene, I think, because what's weird about this is I've never seen the. Well, wait, I have. I think it's on Hulu. I don't know. So the original theatrical cut had that scene cut where he licks the priest's hand.
Yes,
It
that
was
is
cut. And that's in the director's cut, which when I was a kid, that's what I got for like a birthday or a Christmas or whatever, because like I said, my parents didn't know any better. That was cut because they thought it was too crazy for American audiences. And it was really weird because I watched I was bored and I said, "Oh, it's Highlander, let's watch it." And I think it was on Hulu or American Prime, whatever, and Amazon Prime. And I remember watching it was the theatrical cut, and it was bad. The theatrical cut is nowhere near as good as the director's cut. The flashbacks take place in different parts. It was not good. So the director's cut is the only thing I would recommend.
And I think that's something that we can say for the whole of the Highlander franchise.
Oh yeah.
And we'll get to that with specifically Highlander 2 and Highlander, I guess, 4 Endgame. But yeah, that special edition, the director's cut, it gives more background to Connor just kind of having fun on Boston Common and pissing off a foppish Boston elite. But overall, it's a better film, and it makes more sense.
As much sense as a film like this can make.
Which you do have to suspend disbelief a lot to really get into this film. And, it culminates with a pretty decent sword fight. Not a great one. I think we've had better sword fights, like, in the Star Wars films alone.
Well, here's what's funny that you mentioned that. So the original Star Wars films were done by Bob Anderson, who was at that point considered the sword master of Hollywood. He taught Errol Flynn how to sword fight. And then he did Star Wars. He also did the first Highlander, and then he did the first season of Highlander the series.
Okay, I can definitely see that connection.
Yes. And then Bob Anderson also did Lord of the Rings. He did essentially any film between 1930s and 2005 probably had Bob Anderson involved, and he was incredible. He said Viggo Mortensen was the most natural sword fighter he ever taught. He taught Christopher Lambert. He taught David Prowse. He taught Mark Hamill. He did all those guys. And yeah, you're right. The sword fight in Highlander 1. So here's the best part about Christopher Lambert. He's blind.
Yeah.
He is.
Without glasses.
Yes. He is legally blind and without glasses. And apparently he can't wear contacts. So I give props to the man, because he did not just one, not just two, he did 3, he did 4 Highlander films, requiring him to have sword fighting skills, and he can't see shit. So, I get it, right? So, the best part I will say about Highlander 1's sword fight, the final fight, the big scene, it was very theatrical because it was filmed from one angle. Just like if you were watching it in a theater, you've got the big glass that explodes at the end. you've got the Kurgan, you've got Connor, and you only see it from one angle the entire time. And so it's very theatrical. So you're watching it, and I think they did that on purpose because as an audience member, there's something ingrained in us, I think, because of, hundreds of thousands of years of theater. We only see theater from one direction, unless you're doing theater in the round. But that's not that common. It happens occasionally. So you're watching this sword fight and you're going, wow, this is great. And it was very basic moves, obviously, but I honestly, I wonder if that's just because Christopher Lambert couldn't see shit.
Probably. And it's very much a fourth wall fight, especially at the end where the camera just zooms in and then there can be only one. It's like, who the hell is he talking to?
Yeah. But that part is so great. And then the glass explodes and he's just like, ah!
It is so great. We forgive the fact that you can see the wires that are picking him up.
No, they put lightning bolts around that. It's fine.
So, Highlander is, in and of itself, a film that I will suggest to anybody to watch.
Yeah, I think even if you were teaching a film school, I think Highlander should still be recommended. It's a weird film if you really think about it. The director Russell Mulcahy was only known for doing music videos, and then suddenly he's doing this film, and then Queen does the entire soundtrack.
Well, and it's that connection to music videos that got Queen. And they were kind of pissed off with the way that things went on Flash Gordon, that they were originally asked to do just one song. And then they read the script, they saw the screeners, and they went, shit, this is a good movie. We'll do it all.
And they did, and it's one of my favorite albums. It's actually, it's weird because it is a Queen album. It is not Highlander the soundtrack. It is a Queen album, and it is nothing but songs from Highlander.
Well, and there's one song in there that, for the life of me, I can't remember if it predated Highlander, but it's a song that's made famous from Queen on Live Aid. This is one of the songs they played on Live Aid, Hammer to Fall. And when you listen to the lyrics, it is a very political song. It's about the hammer and sickle of Soviet Russia and the hammer falling and the Soviet Union falling. And it shows up in Highlander when there's the militant guy with PTSD who the Kurgan runs through with his sword.
Oh, yeah.
It shows up when he's driving around looking for something that he can help out as a vigilante. So this is a guy who wears a shirt that says Moscow, up yours, and he's listening to Hammer to Fall. So I thought it was very well used music.
Oh, the 80s.
So this happened in 86, and it took a full 5 years before we saw another Highlander film. Highlander 2, The Quickening.
Yes.
Oh, it's a mixed bag because we do have two versions of this film. So just speaking about the theatrical version, your thoughts?
It's Highlander, and it is a ridiculously odd choice. I mean, they had the original director, they had the original actor, they had Sean Connery, they had. The problem is, right? They ended it. So the biggest problem was Highlander 1 ended it. There can be only one. He was it. He was the one. At the end of it, it was like, you are the one.
It's definitive. There's nothing more that needs to be said.
Right. So they said, well, how do we do this? How do we retcon this? Which again, I don't think retcon was a term back then. So they said, how do we retcon this? So they came up with the whole... It makes me laugh so much. Immortals are from another planet called Zeist. And we peppered them throughout history in order to... God, what was it?
It was
solve
their punishment.
Our rebellion?
Yeah, it was their punishment for a rebellion on Zeist.
Against a rebellion that we had no clue about. We had no frame of reference. We just knew that Connor and Sean Connery had been part of the rebellion, and then they had been thrown arbitrarily throughout human history. No one even explained that. And even in the end, right? So at the end of the movie, even once Connor had done all his thing, what did that solve? Was Connor going to suddenly transport to Zeist and become the king of Zeist?
Yeah,
no one explained.
That was part of the thing, is that part of their punishment is they would go to this world, Earth, and fight till the last, and the last had the option to return to Zeist.
Like, that doesn't even...
This just proves that drugs were rampant in Hollywood.
Okay, yeah, especially because, again, Russell McKay, who was the returning director, was mostly known for doing music videos.
Yeah.
And he proves it. I mean, the sets for Highlander 2, the sets, the designs, all of that looked like what you would expect from a music video.
It looked great. It's got a great aesthetic, but it doesn't change the fact that the story is shit.
Yeah, compared to Highlander. Again, as I said earlier, if you took Highlander away and made it just a sci-fi show or sci-fi movie, I think it would have been fine. In fact, I think Highlander 2 fits with Blade Runner and Aliens. I think those are the same universe, and that's where I'm at about that.
I can follow that, especially Blade Runner. It definitely took some notes from Blade Runner. Now, there's something about Highlander 2 that I was not aware of until recently. In driving back from Texas after dropping off my wife and daughters in Wichita Falls, that's a 15-hour drive back to Arizona. I had some time to fill, so I was listening to a podcast, Junk Food Cinema, and one of the hosts of this is C. Robert Cargill, who is the writer of Doctor Strange, the Marvel film.
Oh.
I cannot suggest this podcast enough to anybody. It's a lot of fun. And they were talking about Highlander. And apparently the creator of Highlander, I cannot remember his name, but he was sent a script for Highlander 2. And this is something they mentioned on the podcast, where he had a roommate, and the roommate's like, "Don't you want to read this?" And he goes, "No. I said everything I wanted to with the first film. I don't want to know what they're doing with my characters." "Well, do you mind if I read it?" "Yeah, no problem." So his roommate grabs the script, goes into another room, and the creator of Highlander is sitting there and hears his roommate yell out, "They're aliens!" And that's how he found out how bad they were screwing up Highlander.
God. Oh, that's so bad.
Now, I can't even really begin to explain the progress of the film of Highlander. Basically, it's in the future. There's no ozone. Connor helps create a fake ozone. And then General Katana from Planet Zeist wants to kill Connor, sends people back, he
Michael
kills
Ironside.
one of them. Oh, and it's Michael Ironside, like you said. It's another great actor in a bad film. So Connor kills one of Michael Ironside's lackeys, and I guess that quickening was enough to make him from an old man to a young man, and we have Highlander all over again, and apparently he has the power to bring people back from the dead, and that's how we get Ramirez.
Yeah, he's attached, like spiritually attached to Ramirez. So he screams out Ramirez during a quickening, and so Sean Connery comes back in Scotland during a performance of Hamlet. And thus comes the term, what was it?
Farewell, dear shithead.
Farewell, dear shithead. Oh, God, this film, again,
It hurts.
It's not a good Highlander film, but it is a great sci-fi film. I mean, okay, if you took this film, disconnected it from Highlander, and compared it to Total Recall, it's not that different from
No, it's not.
weirdness.
It's on par. Well, this is the film, too, that, as Russell McKay called it, has the banging up against the wall scene. And for no other reason, just Connor, this takes place in the future. Connor's an old man on the point of death. He takes the head of somebody from Zeist, so he has a quickening, becomes young, and the first thing he does is takes the female lead of the film and has a love scene up against the wall.
I wouldn't call that love.
No.
First off, there's
he has a lust
garbage
scene up against the wall.
Yeah, they're in an alley. There's garbage next to them. He's been blown up. He's sweaty. He's disgusting. She's got. I mean, oh my God, that's. She doesn't even know him.
It's a pointless scene. It is if ever there was a more pointless sex scene in a major film, I can't think of it.
Now, did they cut that out of the theatrical scene?
I think that was cut out of the theatrical, and that's a good carryover to. There's two versions of this film.
Two?
At least two. This film ran over budget, over schedule, so the producers took over and created what we know as the theatrical version of Highlander 2: The Quickening. But now we have, it's been around for years, Highlander 2: The Renegade Cut, which is the original producers and the original director getting together to cut this film as they wanted it.
Which is weird because they tried to make it fit, right, with the Highlander universe, but it still doesn't fit.
It doesn't, because they had to. They instead of aliens, they're now humans from Earth, but going Star Wars a long time ago.
Yeah, who were just randomly peppered throughout time.
It makes no sense, but it does add in more to make the film more palatable, I guess is the way to say it. It's not good, but you can enjoy it more. It kind of like resets where some of the scenes come in. It gives you more to care about because it shows more about Connor and the love interest from the first film. But it's still not good.
It's better.
Better, but it's a piece of shit that doesn't stink so much.
Yeah, nothing about it's good. The sword fights are not good. So again, Bob Anderson did the first one. He did not do the second one. None of them have good swords. Let's be honest. Connor doesn't even use the katana until the final sword fight.
Yeah, after Ramirez kind of dies. Does he sacrifice
Maybe.
himself?
It's like sometimes you have to sum up the entirety of your life. No, the sword fights are not good. They're all basic. When it comes to stage combat, they're all basic. Just position 1, position 2, position 3, position 4. Like every single sword fight is that, and even the final sword fight is just blasé. It's not good.
The big thing about the final battle is that, and what we briefly mentioned earlier, is that the whole point of this film is that there's no ozone layer. And that Connor helped create this crappy shield that is protecting the Earth, but making everybody miserable. So it's not the fact that he finally defeats Michael Ironside. It's that for some reason he can walk into the beam and shut it down.
Yeah.
Which they don't explain.
Well, he's immortal.
And that's kind of like the giveaway is, well, he's immortal. That makes everything make sense.
That makes everything make sense. Everything.
So we have 2 versions of this film, but we're only going to count it once. We get a third Highlander film.
Oh, God.
Which I know was released in theaters, but it feels like it was straight to DVD, or back then straight to VHS. Highlander, The Final Dimension.
Oh, boy.
Oh.
So, before you mention that, because you mentioned that, I have to get more to drink. Give me 2 seconds. Big pause, because Jesus Christ, this movie deserves it. And we're back.
Yeah, I definitely agree that talking about Highlander 3 is drink-worthy.
So the best part about Highlander 3 is it has multiple titles.
Okay.
So there's Highlander 3, which you and I both know it was called like Highlander The Final Dimension.
Yes.
But in other countries, it was known as Highlander 3 The Magician, Highlander 3 The Sorcerer, and Highlander 3 The Final Conflict.
Now, I remember it originally as Highlander the Sorcerer. And then most recently, I've come to know it as The Final Dimension.
Right. I think, so the version I bought as a kid, because again, as going back, I was allowed to purchase rated R movies when I was not anywhere near the age of rated R movies. It was Highlander The Final Dimension when I bought it, and that was the theatrical, or not the theatrical, the director's cut of, all the sex scenes. But I think in different countries, it had all these different names because sorcerer, magician, etc. had all these different meanings, and they just couldn't come up with what this movie was really supposed to be about.
And that's understandable. And it bugs me that this film is as bad as it is because of one of the actors in it, Mako, the guy that kind of trains Connor. Mako has had a long history. He was in, I think, both Conan movies with Schwarzenegger. He was
great.
He's fantastic. He's a great actor. He was in Sidekicks with Jonathan Brandis and Chuck Norris.
You can't quote that when you're saying he was a great actor.
Okay, shit film, but he was great in it.
But I love that film. Just throwing that out.
Me too, and that is something that you can actually see on YouTube right now.
I learned how to climb a rope thanks to that film.
Oh God, we're gonna have to talk about sidekicks later. And his final film was actually voicing the character Splinter in the CGI Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie.
Oh, I love that movie.
So he's great in such a bad movie, and I shouldn't be surprised that it's bad because it's got Mario Van Peebles, and that guy really didn't do good films.
I didn't even know he was an actor.
Well, strictest definition, I mean, he's paid to be in a movie. That makes him an actor. Does he act? That's up for debate. But this is basically taking the idea of, that quickening that Connor had at the end of the first film? What if that wasn't really the quickening? What if we had some immortals who were stuck in a cave somewhere, and because they were removed from the game, this quickening with Connor and the Kurgan was extreme.
I mean, not only does that not make sense, I'm okay with it. Because that's right. That's like the most sense they could make out of anything. Some cave rocks decided to block your magic sensing of immortality.
I'm choking on whiskey. Yeah, it doesn't make sense. And earlier we talked about how there's going to be films in the Highlander franchise where we go, yeah, and this happened. So Highlander 3 happened, and then we, the very next year, get Highlander the series, starring Adrian Paul.
Okay. So first off, wait, I think Highlander the series was after Highlander 2.
Hold on. I got IMDb. I'm kind of preparing for this one.
I think because the only reason
you are correct. Yeah, Highlander the series. I forgot when it started. 1992.
Highlander 3 tried to incorporate very small aspects of Highlander the series, which was, if you recall, in the first Highlander, if they died, they came back to life immediately. Like when Connor got stabbed, he would just stand back up. Yeah. In that infamous scene in Boston or whatever, when he was like, "Oh, I'm sorry for calling your wife a warthog."
Yeah, on Boston Common.
Yeah. But in Highlander, in Highlander the series, they established if you get stabbed or whatever, you can die for a undetermined amount of time and come back. And they played with that in Highlander 3 for stupid reasons. Because Connor comes back to New York for, obviously he discovers that Mario Van Peebles is still alive. And we're all still surprised that Mario Van Peebles is still alive. So he runs back to New York and immediately gets into a gang warfare fight for no reason. And then comes back to life in a hospital, and then for some reason winds up in a mental ward, and then has to pretend that he knew Napoleon. Highlander 3.
Oh God, this makes my head hurt.
Yes.
Okay, so let's move on to a positive thing. This came out in like 94, 95, give or take. The series started in 92.
Yes.
And the series opened with Duncan and Connor.
Right. So originally they approached Christopher Lambert and said, "Hey, we want to do a TV series." And he said, "Well, I'm such a huge, important actor that I don't do TV." And we all know that Christopher Lambert is such a huge and important actor. So we all said, yeah, that's fine. We understand that you don't do TV. So they said, well, that's fine. We'll just recast you. And then they eventually got Adrian Paul, and he said, well, I don't want to play Connor McLeod. I want to play my own character. So they said, well, okay, that's fine. You can play Duncan McLeod, his friend. And they said, that's cool. And then somehow, and I'm not exactly sure, they got Christopher Lambert, who swore he didn't do TV shows, to be in the first episode. But for some weird reason, and I'm guessing it's a copyright reason, or I don't know how Hollywood works, he could not use the Connor McLeod sword. So he had a very random, generic katana in the show, whereas Duncan had the elaborate ivory dragon katana type sword that was reminiscent of Connor's.
And that's where, for Highlander fans, the phrase open mouth versus closed mouth comes in. Because Connor's blade, the hilt is an open mouth dragon. Mm-hmm. For Duncan, it's a closed mouth dragon. Which doesn't make sense why Duncan would have this blade, because in the original Highlander, which we're led to believe in the series is still canon because they reference the Kurgan.
Yes.
Ramirez mentions that the blade was made by his father-in-law in 500 BC, and it's one of a kind. Apparently it's not one of a kind because Duncan has something very similar.
Well, Duncan acquires his sword from a man named Hideo Koto in the beginning episode of season 3.
Holy shit, you know the guy's name.
Yeah, because I named my beta fish in high school after him.
Okay, in all seriousness, though, that is one of my favorite episodes of the series. That is a beautiful episode.
To be fair, it is one of the best episodes ever in the series. Because, let's be honest, just like any Highlander franchise, the series is full of huge misses, but some pretty good hits.
Very much.
Because, not to quote the other podcast out there called Highlander Rewatch, who also are quoting David Abramovitz, who was the showrunner of Highlander. Highlander is supposed to be a show with Talmudic stories that also kick ass. And the whole concept of what they wanted to do with the series was tell stories that made you think about the concept of being an immortal, but also obviously still keep the sword fighting and action, involved.
And it's very much a swashbuckling atmosphere. I mean, hell, in the opening credits, we have Duncan swinging in on a rope, fighting with his katana. It's swashbuckling very much.
Yes, I mean, the one thing you and I always commented about in the first episode itself, which I think definitely highlights the differences between Duncan and Connor, is when they are sword fighting in a random warehouse, because that's what you have, apparently, when you're an immortal. Connor's wearing sweats, and Duncan is wearing some kind of button-up opera type, flowing pirate affair, and they're both sword fighting. It's a good scene. It's a great scene where they're both sword fighting, but it really highlights the difference. I mean, Connor's dressed to work, Duncan's dressed to look good, and that's pretty much the difference between both the characters.
And that kind of lays the groundwork ultimately for the Highlander series, where Duncan looks good. And let's be honest, Adrian Paul, good-looking guy. Even to this day, he does guest work on, what was it, Arrow?
He's been in Arrow. I know he's in something else right now. I can't remember. Obviously, I've only watched the first season of Arrow.
Yeah, and he's well into his 50s. And me, as a man pushing 40, I wish I looked like him.
Yeah, same here. When I met him, it was completely on accident, and I can't even find the picture. I'm very saddened by it. I was at the LDI conference in Las Vegas. I'm sure I've told you about it plenty of times.
Oh, I've got the picture somewhere. I'll have to find it.
Oh my God. If you can find it, you'll be my best friend ever. Wait. You are my best friend. But for the audience, though, I was at the LDI conference in Las Vegas, and I was working at a booth, and this guy walks by, and I kept thinking, man, that guy looks just like Adrian Paul. Man, that guy looks just like Adrian Paul. That can't be Adrian Paul. Well, I can't let that guy walk by if it's not Adrian Paul. So I walk up and I said, hey, excuse me, sir, do you realize you look just like Adrian Paul? And he walks by me, he turns around, and he has his name tag purposely turned around so you can't see his name. And I mean, when he turns around, it's Adrian Paul. And as a straight male, I'm going to tell you this right now, I got weak in the knees. And he turns his name tag around, and it says Adrian Paul, and he goes, yeah, I get that a lot. And, oh my God, I about died. And I sit there and I say, oh my God, excuse me, sir, I'm so sorry. Why are you here? That was really the first thing I could actually say to him. Because the LDI conference is for lighting. It's Lighting Dimensions International, whatever. It's about people who are involved in lighting for theatrical and large events. And he said, "Oh, I'm producing a show down in Australia for a magician, and they need a lot of lighting stuff. And so I'm here looking at stuff and blah blah blah." And I said, "Oh, that's incredible." And he said, "Oh, what are you here for?" Which I thought was great because he was very interested in me. Or, well, pretended to be. And I said, oh, I'm here for this, blah, blah, blah. And he said, okay, cool. And I said, excuse me, sir, do you mind if I got a picture with you? And he said, yeah, that's fine. So I asked the people that were with me, I said, hey, can you take a picture with me with this guy? And they said, okay, cool, let's grab a camera. Blah, blah. This was before people had smartphones, so they had to actually go get a camera. So as we're waiting, here's the best part. We're standing there, and I'm looking at this man, and... First off, my knees are, I can barely stand. And I look at him and I say, hey, I just want to let you know you were very influential in my life as a young man. And I really looked up to you. And he said, oh, thank you very much. That's really nice. And he looked at the people that were about to take our picture and he said, they have no idea who I am. And I kind of laughed. I said, how, what? And then they took the picture. He walks off. And I walk back over, and I have to sit down immediately because I am in shock and awe.
You're probably
and they walk up to me and they say,
point.
yeah. They said, why did that guy want a picture with you? And he was right. They had no clue who he was. And I posted it on a Highlander forum, or the Highlander forum, and that forum got hacked or whatever, and that picture does not exist anymore. So, Tony, if you can find it, dear God, please find it. Because,
oh, God, I'm going to have to look for it now.
Yeah. I'm sure it's well hidden. That was 2006, 2007. That was forever ago. But yeah, I met Adrian Paul, and he was a gentleman, and he was very gracious, and dear God, I've never met one of my Hollywood, if you can call him Hollywood, but I've never really met, if I can meet Harrison Ford, I'd meet Harrison Ford, but meeting Adrian Paul was just, oh my God, it was so incredible. And I'm still tearing up, so I'm just going to stop talking.
Most recently, like literally a week or two ago, I got to meet Elvira. So I can kind of understand where you are. I remember when you sent me that picture, I showed it to Lindsey, and she looked at the picture and went, "Oh, that's son of a bitch." And then we showed it to my mother-in-law, who had a long-standing crush on Adrian Paul. I'm not even going to say what she said, but man, she was jealous.
I found out through the Highlander Rewatch podcast that I listened to, just another shout out, that was the main demographic, apparently, was mothers and housewives, which is weird because it was such a big thing for young teens like you and I. Apparently, it was either young male teenagers or it was freaking 40-year-old housewives. I mean, if you watch, I'm not kidding, if you watch Goldfinger, that whole scene in the airplane where he wakes up and they say, and she says, "Hello, my name's Pussy Galore," and he goes, "Oh, really?" Adrian Paul looks exactly like Sean Connery from that scene.
Which is what we were talking about earlier. There was talk of Adrian Paul taking over the role of James Bond when not Daniel Craig, Pierce Brosnan was done with Die Another Day. Holy crap, would that have been amazing?
That would have been insane. But instead, he did 6 seasons of Highlander, and I don't even count the 6th season. I mean, I know you said that you and Lindsey have been pushing off the ending of the 5th season.
Yeah.
I'm in the middle of the 5th season right now, and I blame Adrian Paul. I feel Adrian Paul wanted to leave the series, and they knew it. And I think they decided to do some really crazy stuff to try to see what they could do to make a spinoff. And the 6th season is rife with all these guest stars that didn't work. And then we got Highlander the Raven, which we actually haven't mentioned in this podcast. And Highlander the Raven was so bad it got canceled after season 1.
And that's the thing, Highlander Raven, its claim to fame is a Miss America contestant who slept with Bill Clinton.
Yes, and let's be honest, good for her, because she's great.
Yeah, Highlander the Raven had no point. And then you have Highlander the series end, and then Adrian Paul decides to do a film called Merlin, which Lindsey and I watched on Amazon Prime. But let me clarify, we didn't watch Merlin. We watched the Riff Tracks edition of Merlin. And it is a modern 2000 take on Merlin, and Adrian Paul plays Lancelot. And the character of Merlin is played by the guy who was Drop Dead Fred. We've gone from Highlander the series to Highlander Endgame. Which arguably is the second best film in the franchise.
To be fair, this movie deletes Highlander 2 and 3.
Good job.
It does, and if anyone has questions about that, first off, it has a flashback that takes place 10 years before the series even happens. which ironically is at the very end of Highlander 1.
Mm-hmm.
And then when the movie takes place, it is at the end of Highlander the series.
Yeah.
And because it has Connor going into the sanctuary, it means Highlander 2 obviously didn't happen because no one wants that to happen. And that Highlander 3 was never a thing.
So with every subsequent Highlander film that happens, we have to admit that the previous films don't count.
Yes.
Now, with Highlander Endgame, this is the merging of the film and the series,
Yes.
which totally disregards any movie. And as you mentioned, it opens with Connor and Duncan 10 years prior, which you can tell because Duncan still has the ponytail.
It basically says, hey, we know what you like. We know what you like, which was Highlander 1. That's what everyone liked. If you're a Highlander fan, Highlander 1 was it. That was it. And it says, we also know what you like, which was Duncan with a ponytail. I don't know how true this is, but apparently Adrian Paul had his hair cut because his hairdresser or whoever said if you keep growing your hair long, you're going to lose your hair. So that's why after season 5, Duncan got his hair cut, and he never had long hair after that. So after that, it was just extensions.
Adrian Paul with short hair doesn't look bad, let's be honest.
Nah, he's good. It's Adrian Paul. He's always a beefcake.
I think we need to clarify, with the way we're talking about Adrian Paul, both of us are married to women.
Yeah, but Adrian Paul is essentially the modern day Sean Connery. Everyone wants to be Sean Connery. Who doesn't want to be Sean Connery? So if you're given the equivalent, which is Adrian Paul, and he portrays a 400-year-old Scottish immortal, who doesn't want to be a 400-year-old Scottish immortal?
So we have Highlander Endgame, which this is a film that takes place in the universe of the series. And in that, I think it's successful. I like it. I really do.
No, I agree. It definitely takes the series and runs with it, but it still gives us the fan service because it gives us the what is that? The antique room? What do you want to call that? The room that Connor went into that held all his treasures from his journeys.
I would call it the antique room, the circular room that has everything from the life of Connor.
Yeah, and I loved that. That was a great homage to the original. We get some... Okay, so aside from loving the first movie and loving the sword fights in it, I feel that Endgame has the best sword fights out of the series, aside from the original movie.
By far.
Right? The sword fights are great. Adrian Paul is physically just killing it. He takes on 5 or 6 people at one point, and you believe it. It's not cut to a way where you're going, that's just a bunch of stunt actors doing bullshit. No, it's believable, and then you find out it really is Adrian Paul because his actual kung fu master is actually one of the immortals that's trying to kill him. What I did like, if you pay attention to the number of heads Jacob Kell had,
I was going to get to this. I'm glad you brought it up.
666.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when it comes to Connor McLeod, I liked what they did. I liked that Connor had to come back to deal with his exile. He had to come back to his mother, which we've never talked about. I liked that he felt bad about leaving her behind, and then he had to deal with a bunch of bullshit with the priest and Jacob Kell. I think it was a good addition. And the fact they brought back whatever her name was to play his wife, I thought that was great. I mean, to bring back the original actors meant that they actually cared about the film.
This felt like the biggest straightforward connection to the original film out of any Highlander film they did.
Yes. No, I entirely agree. And although you can tell in the soundtrack, I felt they were really pushing for a Braveheart kind of...
Yeah.
I mean, he's riding through the Highlands, and they've got this huge soundtrack, these flutes, the bagpipes, and they're going, "Oh yeah, he's a Highlander." You got to feel for him, and it was honestly, it was great soundtrack. It was a good soundtrack, but they brought back the original actress for his wife. They brought back Connor McLeod himself, who, let's be fair, had aged a lot.
Well, they even brought back the one that was his secretary. And for all intents and purposes, she looked exactly like she did in the original film.
She did, and that was great because it was Highlander. You had to watch the director's cut to understand the connection between him and her, to understand he had saved her from the Nazis. And then once you watch the director's cut to understand that, you understood the connection when she died in, Highlander Endgame, why it meant so much to him.
And that's where it kind of blows my mind that Highlander is the series for director's cuts. Because we have the original film has a director's cut, which... its main purpose is to give more information to Rachel, the one that he kind of raised, and you get the impression she's in love with him throughout her whole life. And then you've got Highlander 2 has a director's cut, and then Highlander 4 Endgame, it's not really a director's cut, it's a pre-cut, which is available on the special edition DVD, which is the cut of the film before the producers took over and really cut out parts that, some that don't make sense, but also parts that really drive home the point of the film. And in Endgame, we have Duncan's wife, who in the original theatrical cut is killed by Jacob Kell, but in the original cut, she survives. And as you mentioned, Jacob Kell has 661 kills. And this was a part of the film that they just kind of forgot about.
Yeah.
Where Jacob is trying to get 666 kills. But in the previous cut, he lets Duncan's wife go, so he only has 665 kills.
Yeah, and they never explain that. I mean, obviously, in the theatrical cut, they don't need to. And I saw it in the theatrical cut. I went to the theaters. I was probably one of the only 10 people that actually saw it in theaters.
I went to. I was living in Albuquerque, going to college.
God damn it! Then we were the one of the two that saw it out of the 300 people. And she died. She, like, in my head, she was dead. And when you buy Highlander Endgame, I think there's only actually one version you can buy, which is the one that comes with the original cut and the theatrical cut. Yeah. And she lives. And you're like, okay, well, I guess in my head, I can say that's why he failed, right? If you're going with the whole 666 thing, you're like, well, in your head, I guess that's why he failed. He didn't kill her, so he only got 665, which is the dumbest number in the world. So, right? I mean, I don't know, because they didn't push that. If you're going to put that number in your movie, why wouldn't you make an emphasis of that number? But for some weird reason, they put that into their film as a Easter egg.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we have to explain, that in the original film, it's announced that when Joe Dawson is looking at their computer, Jacob Kell has 661 kills. And later in the film, he kills all of his subordinates to supposedly get him to 666 kills. But in this original cut, not only does he let Duncan's wife go, there's the character played by Donnie Yen, who is this honorable Chinese warrior who sticks his sword into the wall and then cuts off his own head. I really get the impression that the creators of Highlander Endgame had no idea where they were going.
Yeah, welcome to Highlander.
Which by this point, after Highlander 2 and 3, we have to admit, they don't know where they're going.
That's the... I mean, we're about to get to the source, so we'll get there. But
Get back to the
really
what?
feel... I really feel that for some weird reason, the people that do Highlander overall have no clue what they were ever doing. And it blows my mind, because they had a concept. And obviously they based a TV series off that concept. And off that TV series, they had amazing... Again, the TV series was hit or miss, but they had amazing concepts in that show.
Yeah.
It lasted 6 seasons. But for some weird reason, just like the movies, they could never, ever, ever, ever figure out what the hell they were doing. And that brings us to Highlander the Source.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
What's a good way of saying this? Fuck Highlander the Source. Fuck anybody who wrote this film. Fuck anybody who directed this film. Holy shit, what were you thinking?
I blame Adrian Paul. No,
That's
I'm not
hard
kidding.
to say, but I agree.
Adrian Paul was this whole peace initiative thing. So Adrian Paul was doing all this martial arts stuff, and he said, I'm really into these Chinese butterfly knives, blah, blah, blah. So I want to showcase this. His personal martial arts guru was the fight expert on that film. When Adrian Paul said, oh, I really want to showcase the fact that I'm doing these butterfly knife things, he said, oh, that's cool. Well, we got to get rid of your katana somehow. So, I mean, I have no real basis of this, but I do have an interview with Adrian Paul's, trainer, who said these specific things. And so my guess is they said, well, that's cool. We got to get rid of the katana. So let's chunk it into Joe Dawson and kill him. And then also kill your katana, which is the most iconic thing of goddamn Highlander. Again, I have no proof, but Adrian Paul is about, he has this whole thing, a charity thing called the Peace Initiative. So my guess is they said, oh, well, let's make sure that immortals are all about peace. So that was the ending of Highlander the Source. Instead of there can be only one, it turns out that was all wrong. Every single immortal in the existence of humanity for thousands of years were wrong. And you were all supposed to be nice to each other.
That sounds about right. Now, when this film finished, we drove back to our apartment, and I said it felt like a funeral.
Yes.
Every Highlander film I can go back and watch, except for Highlander the Source.
I've never watched The Source again.
Me neither. That is the only time I've ever watched it. It hurts. It is not Highlander. It's not even worth watching. It is a piece of shit start to finish.
No, it is. And it's incredible. It's shocking to have even the actors try to even defend it. It had Adrian Paul. It had Mythos. Mythos.
It had Mythos. It had Joe Dawson. I want to cry.
Joe Dawson. It killed Joe Dawson.
That is the last bit that we have before the potential reboot that has been going on for years now. They've been talking about rebooting Highlander with Ryan Reynolds as Connor.
Yep.
Dave Bautista, he's considered for the Kurgan. I don't see this film ever getting off the ground.
Well, the biggest problem is these people don't understand Highlander. Say Joss Whedon had done Highlander.
Oh, he could have done it.
Right? Or anyone else in that era. So,
screw it. Let's just say Joss Whedon, because I'm kind of fantasizing about Joss Whedon doing Highlander, and it's giving me tingles. I like it.
Well, he also knows immortal people that are having to deal with the bullshit of their lives.
So ultimately, from this discussion, I think we can really come to the conclusion that Highlander is great. Everything beyond that, if you got a chance to check out the director's cut, that's the one that you want to check out. To wrap this up, holy crap, this was a lot of fun. Jack, I want to thank you so much for being part of this, and we definitely have to do this again, and I think we have to break down and talk about Star Trek.
Well, do you have another 3 hours?
At least 3 hours to talk about Star Trek, but I want to thank everyone for listening. Again, thank Jack for participating while Lindsey is out of town, and I hope you all had fun listening to this, and we'll talk to you later.
Y'all have a good time.
Farewell, dear shithead.